The call came in at 4:47 in the morning, and the dispatcher's voice didn't waver once. Kitchen fire at the Hartwell Community Center. 2 units responding. Incident commander requested on scene. Battalion Chief Renata Okafor was already awake. She had been awake for most of the night, which was not unusual for her anymore. She sat at her kitchen table in Sudbury, Ontario, with a mug of coffee gone cold and a letter from the Regional Fire Services Review Board sitting open in front of her. The letter was dated 3 weeks prior. She had read it perhaps 40 times. After careful consideration of your application for the district commander position, the board has determined. She folded it before she finished reading it again. She already knew every word. She pulled on her gear in the dark and drove toward the smoke. The Hartwell Community Center had stood at the corner of Paris Street and Elgin Avenue for 61 years. It was the kind of building that a city accumulates the way a person accumulates scars, not because anyone planned for it, but because it kept surviving things that should have ended it. 2 roof collapses. A flood in 1998, budget cuts that closed it 3 separate times. The community kept pulling it back each time. There were A meetings in the East Hall on Tuesday mornings and a Somali language class on Thursday afternoons and a food bank that ran every second Saturday out of the room that used to be a storage closet. When Renata arrived, the fire was contained to the kitchen wing, but the smoke had moved through the ventilation system and filled the east corridor. One of the Tuesday morning regulars, a man named Douglas, 73, who had not missed a meeting in 4 years, had been found unconscious near the rear exit by the first unit on scene. She took command without announcement. She didn't need to announce it. The crew from Station 9 knew her. Most of them had trained under her at some point. She was 34 years old. She had been with Regional Fire Services for 11 years. She held certifications in technical rescue, hazardous materials response, and structural fire behavior that most commanders twice her age did not have. She had written the incident response protocol that 3 districts in northern Ontario now used as their standard. She had also been passed over for district commander 6 times. 6 times in 4 years. 6 different letters with slightly different language that all said the same thing. The men who got the positions instead of her were not bad at their jobs. That was the part that was hardest to carry. They were fine, 2 of them she had trained herself. She had watched them walk into rooms she had prepared for them, take seats at tables she had helped build, and she had smiled and shaken their hands and gone back to her shift. She had never said a word about it to anyone on her crew. Douglas survived. He was conscious by the time the paramedics loaded him into the ambulance, alert enough to ask if anyone had grabbed his jacket from the hall, because his daughter had given it to him at Christmas, and it was the nicest thing he owned. Someone had grabbed it. Renata had grabbed it herself, coming out of the east corridor on the second sweep. She handed it through the ambulance door, and Douglas held it against his chest like it was something holy, and she turned back to the scene before he could thank her properly, because there was still work to do, and because she did not know how to receive gratitude without deflecting it. That was something her mother used to say about her. Renata could walk through fire for you and then apologize for the smoke. Her mother, Celestine Okafor, had come to Sudbury from Lagos in 1981 with a nursing degree that Ontario did not recognize and a determination that no review board could have measured or quantified. She had worked in a textile factory for 2 years while she completed the requalification courses. She had raised Renata largely alone, in a 2-bedroom apartment on Notre Dame Avenue, and she had never once described this as hardship. She described it as the cost of arrival. You pay it, she used to say, and then you get to work. Renata had been getting to work her entire life. The 6th letter sat on her kitchen table. There would presumably be a 7th position, a 7th process, a 7th careful consideration that arrived at the same careful conclusion. She filed her incident report at 7:15 in the morning, then drove back to the station, showered, changed, and went to the regional training facility for the 9 o'clock certification review she was running for the newer members of Station 12. She did not think about the letter again until noon. The man who changed everything was not a fire chief, a board member, or a government official. He was a retired structural engineer named Walter Broom, and he came to the certification review by accident. He had been scheduled to deliver a guest lecture on load-bearing behavior in commercial structures to a completely different cohort, in a completely different room, and he had walked through the wrong door and found Renata mid-demonstration. standing in front of a projected diagram of a residential structure with the kind of controlled authority that made the room very quiet. He stood in the doorway for a moment. She noticed him, but did not stop. She was explaining, with a patience that was also precision, how a building communicates before it falls. The sounds it makes, the way door frames shift and windows start to stick, the particular silence that comes when a structure has decided it is finished. She had experienced this twice in the field. She described both incidents in plain language without drama, the way someone describes a route they have driven so many times they no longer need to think about it. Walter Broom was 71 years old. He had spent 40 years working with fire services across Ontario and British Columbia on exactly these questions: how buildings fail, how crews read the signs, how training can close the gap between knowledge and instinct. He had written 2 textbooks. He had consulted on the national standards. He watched Renata Okafor teach for 20 minutes and then quietly found a chair in the back of the room. When the session ended and the crew filed out, he waited. "I came to the wrong room," he said. "I know," she said, without looking up from the papers she was collecting. "You were supposed to be in room C. I can walk you over if you need." "I don't need to be walked," he said, though not unkindly. "I want to ask you something. How long have you been running these certification sessions?" She told him. He asked several more questions. She answered them with the same economy she used for everything, not curtly but without ornamentation, each word doing the work it was supposed to do and no more. He asked, finally, about the incident response protocol. He had seen it referenced in a regional assessment report and had been trying to identify who had written it. "That was me," she said. "Who did you write it with?" "I wrote it alone. It went through committee review before adoption." Walter was quiet for a moment. He had a way of going quiet that was not uncomfortable. It felt like something was being calculated, not avoided. "I'm on the advisory panel for the Northern Ontario Fire Leadership Initiative," he said. "We have been trying to find someone to lead the development of a new regional training framework for 18 months. We have spoken to a significant number of people." Renata stopped organizing her papers. "The position is funded for 3 years," he said. "It involves building a curriculum from the ground up, coordinating with 5 regional districts, and eventually delivering a national pilot. It requires someone who understands fire behavior at a technical level, who can teach, who has field experience, and who can write." He paused. "I don't know how we missed you." She did not answer immediately. The room was very quiet. "I applied for district commander," she said finally, 6 times. "I know," he said. "I've been told. That's a different panel, a different process. I can't speak to it." He said this simply, not defensively. "What I can tell you is that this is not that. This is a room where the work you actually do is the qualification." She looked at him for a long moment. She had learned to be careful with hope. Hope had a cost too, and she had paid it several times already and knew what the bill looked like. "I'd want to see the full scope of the initiative before I agreed to anything," she said. "Of course," he said. "And I'd want to speak with the other panel members." "That can be arranged." "And I would need to be permitted to continue responding to incidents in an operational capacity. I'm not willing to step out of the field entirely." Walter almost smiled. "The person we're looking for," he said, "would insist on exactly that." She read the initiative documents over 3 evenings, at her kitchen table, with the letter from the review board, still sitting in the same spot she'd left it. She read the documents with the same precision she brought to incident reports, identifying gaps, noting inconsistencies, writing questions in the margin that she intended to ask. There were things she would change. Significant things. The curriculum framework was structured around a model that had been current in 2009 and had since been substantially revised by research she herself had cited in the incident response protocol. 2 of the 5 regional coordinators, listed as project partners, were, in her professional opinion, not the right people for the scope of work described. She wrote all of this down. She brought it to the first panel meeting, not as criticism but as preparation. She arrived with a 12-page document. She was the only person in the room who had written anything down at all. The panel was 8 people. 3 of them she had encountered before, professionally. One of them, a deputy chief from Thunder Bay named Serge Lamontagne, looked at her across the table with an expression she had seen many times and had learned to identify precisely, the look of someone recalibrating. She did not perform confidence. She did not need to perform something she had always had. She simply presented what she had found, what she thought should be changed, and how she proposed to change it. When she finished, the room was quiet, in the same way her training session had been quiet. Serge Lamontagne said, "You wrote the Northern Protocol." "Yes," she said. "My district adopted it last year. We reduced our average scene command transfer time by 22%. She nodded. She had seen the numbers. "Why did you write it alone?" he asked. "Because I couldn't find anyone to write it with me," she said. "Not because I preferred it that way." Something shifted in the room after that. She could feel it the way she felt the change in a building. Not a sound exactly, but a quality of the air. A small structural adjustment that preceded something larger. The appointment was confirmed on a Thursday afternoon in late October. Renata was on scene at a vehicle extrication on the highway when her phone buzzed with a message from Walter. She finished the extrication. She confirmed the scene was cleared. She filed the preliminary report. Then she sat in the cab of the command vehicle for a moment with the phone in her hand. She called her mother. Celestine Okafor answered on the second ring the way she always did, as though she had been waiting. "Something happened," Renata said. "Tell me," her mother said. Renata told her. She described Walter Broom walking through the wrong door. She described the panel meeting, the 12-page document, Serge Lamontagne's recalibration. She described the scope of the framework, the 3 years of funding, the national pilot. Her mother was quiet for a moment. "The cost of arrival," she said finally. "Yes," Renata said. "You paid it for a long time." "I did." "And now," her mother said. Renata looked out through the windshield at the highway, the orange cones still laid out from the extrication, the last of the afternoon light going flat against the asphalt. "Now I get to work," she said. The framework Renata built over the following 3 years was adopted by all 5 regional districts and eventually by 2 additional districts that had not been part of the original initiative. It was cited in a national review of fire services training. A condensed version of it became mandatory curriculum for battalion commander certification across 4 provinces. She was still operational throughout. She responded to 114 incidents over those 3 years. She was on scene when the Masonville apartment complex partially collapsed in February of the 2nd year, and the decision she made in the first 8 minutes, pulling her crew back based on a sound she heard in the stairwell that she would later describe in a training case study as the building making its last argument, was credited with preventing what could have been a catastrophic loss of life. The 6th letter from the review board was eventually followed by a 7th. She did not apply for the 7th position, not because she had stopped believing she deserved it, because she had found something that needed her particular combination of gifts in a way that a district command role, structured the way it was, could not have used her. The Tuesday morning group at Hartwell Community Center resumed meetings 6 weeks after the fire. In a temporary space the city provided while the kitchen wing was rebuilt, Douglas attended without missing a week. On the first morning back, someone had brought coffee and someone else had brought donuts and someone had put a sign on the wall that read, "We're still here." Renata drove past the center sometimes on her way to the training facility. She never stopped. But she thought about that sign more than she could easily explain. There was something in it that she recognized, the plain, unglamorous fact of persistence. Not triumph, not vindication, just the refusal to be finished when someone else decided you should be. Some rooms will not give you the door. You find the window, or you wait, or you build a new room entirely and invite people to bring what they know. The buildings that survive are the ones that learned early how to hold their own weight, not perfectly, not without cost, but stubbornly and with everything they have for as long as it takes. I keep thinking about the moment Walter Broom walked through the wrong door. Not because it was dramatic. It wasn't, really. It was a man in a hallway, a little turned around, stopping to look because something caught his attention. That's all. But I think about what had to be true for that moment to matter, what Renata had to have already built, over 11 years in near total silence, for 20 minutes of watching her teach to be enough for someone like Walter to pull up a chair and stay. That's the part that doesn't get talked about enough. We want the story to be about the door opening. But the door only opens because of everything that happened before anyone was looking. Renata didn't get 6 rejection letters because she lacked ability. She got them because the people reading those letters had already decided, before they read them, what a district commander looked like. That's a hard thing to sit with. It's not a comfortable story. And I think that's exactly why it's worth telling. What strikes me most about her is that she never made her integrity conditional on being rewarded for it. She wrote the incident response protocol because it needed to exist, not because anyone promised her credit. She ran the certification sessions with the same precision she brought to active scenes, whether or not anyone senior was watching. She showed up to the panel meeting with 12 pages of notes when everyone else came empty-handed, not to perform, but because that was simply how she approached a problem that needed solving. That's what I'd call a kind of moral seriousness that most of us have to work to develop. The understanding that how you do the work matters, independent of whether the work is being recognized. Renata had that in abundance, and I think it was precisely what Walter saw in that room, not a resume, not credentials, but a person who had never separated who she was from what she did. Then there's the intelligence she brought to everything. Not just technical knowledge, though she had that too, but the rarer kind, the ability to look at a problem that everyone else has accepted as fixed and see it differently. The buildings that are about to fall make a particular sound. She had learned to hear it. She brought that same attentiveness to curriculum, to policy, to a panel of 8 people who needed someone to show them what they'd been missing. That kind of thinking doesn't happen by accident. It comes from years of paying attention when paying attention wasn't required. And then there's the part that I find genuinely hard to describe without it sounding like a platitude, but I'll try. The sheer endurance of continuing to do excellent work when the systems around you keep telling you that excellent work isn't enough. 6 times. 6 letters. Celestine Okafor's voice on the phone, steady as anything, the cost of arrival. Her daughter learned something from that. Not bitterness, which would have been understandable. Something quieter and harder. The decision to keep building even when you're not sure anyone is coming to live in what you're building. I think about Douglas holding his jacket in the ambulance. I think about the sign on the wall at Hartwell, "We're still here." Some things survive not because the circumstances were kind, but because the person in the middle of them refused to be finished before the work was done. That's all any of us can really offer, the refusal, the showing up, the 12 pages when everyone else brought nothing. It turns out that's enough. Not always fast, not always recognized in the way you hoped, but enough.